and I don't get hassled. And I went through that period where I actually couldn't go anywhere. And so now it's like heaven. I can go and eat. We go and eat. We go to the movies. We go wherever we want.
Picture this. John Lennon, barefoot in a dim room at Tittenhurst Park, a cup of tea balanced. On an amplifier, a guitar on his lap. His glasses catch the pale morning light as a vinyl spins, loud, defiant, feminine. It's not the Beatles. It's not Yoko. It's someone else entirely. Because behind Lennon's sharp wit and rebellious voice was a quiet reverence for women, who could burn down the stage and the system with a single verse. These weren't just his favorites. They were women who mirrored his rage, his beauty, his pain. Women who didn't flinch. Women who didn't ask to be heard. They took it. First, a powerhouse who never softened her sound to please the room. Tina Turner. Tina's voice could shatter the ceiling and shake the spine. Lennon had seen her perform, live with Ike in the mid-60s, and was stunned, not by the band, but by her. Her legs. Her scream. Her soul. The way she moved wasn't choreographed. It was survival. Thunder. Defiance, wrapped in rhythm. He sat backstage once, watching her unleash a storm in front of thousands. She didn't ask for attention. She seized it. He later said she was the only performer who ever made him feel like a child again. Vulnerable. Small. In awe. They crossed paths in LA briefly, but the energy she carried stayed with him for years. It wasn't flirtation. It was reverence. Lennon felt like she came from another world, one built from fire and fight and sweat, and that was exactly why he adored her. To him, Tina Turner was what rock and roll looked like when stripped of pretense. Just soul and strength howling into the dark. Next, the one who shook the system from the inside, Chrissie Hynde. With the Pretenders, she brought intellect, sexuality, and savagery into a single voice. Lennon admired that she didn't choose between vulnerability and aggression. She combined them effortlessly. There was steel in her softness and fire beneath her calm. Her music didn't flirt with rebellion. It married it. When he heard Brass in Pocket, he grinned, not just at the groove, but at the attitude. She wasn't just performing. She was commanding. He saw in her the same refusal to conform. That had fueled his own rise through the madness of the 60s. They never shared a stage, but Lennon watched from afar, quietly rooting for her.
Decided that whatever we did was going to be in the papers, you know, whether it's Richard or Liz or so-and-so gets married or whatever people like us do is going to be in the papers.
In Chrissie, he saw someone who didn't inherit the revolution, she became it. She reminded him of everything he fought for in the E60s, and everything he wanted the future to be. To him, she was the voice of a generation born out of his own, armed with clarity, danger, and a perfect sneer. Then came a woman whose fire matched his own rebellion. Patti Smith. Lennon didn't just admire Patti, he respected her. In the deepest, most unshakable sense. She was punk poetry before punk had a name, a voice carved from literature and grit. Performer who turned stage fright into sacred ritual. The first time he heard Gloria, he reportedly turned the volume all the way up and laughed. Deep, thrilled, knowing laughter. It wasn't just joy, it was recognition. Finally, someone had arrived who understood that rebellion wasn't just noise, it was language, sharpened and sacred. He was mesmerized by her phrasing, her cadence, how she spoke to the void and didn't wait for permission to be answered. To him, Patti was an echo of the future and the ghost of the everything the establishment feared. She wasn't trying to sound like anyone else, and that alone made her revolutionary in his eyes. She was fierce without theater, vulnerable without apology. Lennon saw himself in her, not the Beatle, but the boy from Liverpool who wrote in a pool notebooks and railed against the world. They never met in person, but through her records. He felt as if they had sat across from each other in the same smoky room of history, exhaling truths. He wrote her a letter once, half compliment, half challenge. She never responded. He loved that. It confirmed everything he suspected. She owed no one anything, not even him. She was untouchable in the most human way, and that only deepened his admiration. Next came a voice as strange and spellbinding as a dream. Stevie Nicks. He discovered her later, long after Fleetwood Mac exploded into stardom. He listened to Landslide on a rainy day and didn't speak for hours. It was more than a song. It was a séance. To Lennon, her voice wasn't just sound, it was shadow. It shimmered and disappeared, heavy with things unsaid. She sang like someone carrying secrets she'd never tell, and he understood that kind of burden, deep, unspoken, wrapped in velvet sorrow. To him, Stevie didn't perform. She floated. She moved through her songs like a ghost who knew your name. Her voice lingered in the air like smoke, whispering truths you weren't sure you wanted to hear. She conjured memory like magic. Lennon felt like she was reading pages from a diary he'd never written but somehow lived. He once said her music sounded like magic written in candlelight. It was a comfort and a curse. Listening to Stevie felt like falling into a dream that didn't want to let go. He'd lie on the carpet of the Dakota apartment, eyes closed, letting Rihanna unwrap around him like a spell. Her voice wasn't loud, but it stayed. It haunted. They never met, but he kept her records close, especially after 1975. Rihanna played, often in the Dakota apartment quietly, like a spirit hovering just out of reach. When the world outside raged with noise, she offered a kind of silence that sang back. A silence Lennon trusted more than most people's voices. And finally, the woman who was thunder wrapped in anguish. Janis Joplin. Lennon once said Janis didn't sing, she bled. She was the only woman who, in his eyes, matched the fire of early rock and roll. Her voice wasn't smooth or trained, it was truth. Cracked open and howling. There was no filter, no compromise. Just fury and feeling, raw as torn skin. Every word felt like a scream scraped from the bottom of a bruised soul. They met once, briefly, in New York. She was drunk. He was sober. But the spark was unmistakable. They talked about Texas and Liverpool like they'd both come from the same broken church of blues and rebellion. Janis laughed too loud. Lennon didn't mind. In fact, he loved it. Her laugh had pain in it. And Lennon knew that kind of laugh, had worn it for years. In that fleeting encounter, there was something unsaid between them, something electric. No romance. Tall. Just recognition. Two misfits shaped by sound and scar tissue, standing across from one another like distorted reflections. For Lennon, Janis was the rare kind of artist who didn't need to impress him, she understood him. And that mattered more than admiration ever could. What struck him most was her refusal to pretend. Janis didn't perform for anyone, she confessed. Her stage was a confessional booth soaked in sweat and bourbon, and she walked into it each night like it was a battlefield. And Lennon, no stranger to exposing pain, through melody, recognized the courage it took to bear that much, to be that unprotected, and still roar. Janis didn't care what people thought. Neither did Lennon. That defiance, that beautiful recklessness, they saw it in each other. It was loud. It was real. And it never needed to be spoken. He respected her more than words could say. Because some souls don't need a conversation to connect. They just need one moment. And they had theirs. John Lennon was complicated, passionate, furious, a soul at war with the world, and often with himself. And these women, they didn't calm that chaos. They matched it. They fed it. They danced with it. They were the only ones whose voices didn't get lost inside his. They made music that cut, that wept, that dared. Their songs were knives and lullabies, weapons and whispers. And Lennon, for all his bravado, never stopped searching for voices that carried more than melody, voices that could go toe-to-toe with his own convictions and contradictions. Because for him, music wasn't about notes. It was about truth. Gritty, cracked, uncomfortable truth. And these women never lied. Not in their lyrics and not in their lives. They didn't perform authenticity. They lived it. Bleeding on microphones, bending sound into something that felt like honesty on fire. They didn't just sing to the world. They challenged it. They stared down its ugliness, its apathy, and dared to respond. With fury, with softness, with everything in between. And John Lennon never forgot the sound of being challenged. Because in their voices, he heard something rare. Not echoes of his past, but glimpses of his soul, reflected back in perfect distortion.